patients started asking me, they were like, hey doc, what should I eat? And as we all know, we aren't taught this in med school.
Hey everyone, this is Klaus from Plant-Based News. Today we're going to hear from MD Columbus Batiste about a range of hot topics including saturated fat, vegan kids, and whether we need omegas from fish. Thank you so much to our content partners, Vegan Linked. They are linked down below in case you want to watch more videos like this. Hope you enjoy and thank you so much.
Patients started asking me, they were like, hey doc, what should I eat? And as we all know, we aren't taught this in med school. So I kind of sat there and I just went to Barnes & Nobles. I didn't go to the library, science library. I went to Barnes & Nobles, just started picking up books with doctors' names on it. But it was after my dad passed away from his illness that I really started delving into it hard. And it was around that time that I stumbled on Cabo Esselstyn's book that struck me in terms of prevent and reverse heart disease. And the chapter that really jumped out at me in that moment was moderation kills. And I thought to myself, you know, this is my dad. If you were to sit and look at his lifestyle, he didn't smoke, he didn't drink, he wasn't obese, he liked sweets, he didn't eat a ton of meat at all, pretty rarely, infrequently. But for him, that moderation was enough to kill him. That perpetuated his diabetes, that led to the onslaught in various organ systems. And so that just resonated with me. And I knew in that moment that I had to make his memory last and that I had to apply those principles from his life to my patients and to people who were willing to listen to me.
I asked some of these other doctors about moderation in the past. I like the way Neil Bernard talks about it. He says, you know, you don't want to do moderate drugs or your kid's doing moderate bad things. Convincing people that going plant-based is really the thing. You know, a lot of times they attribute our success to simply cutting out processed foods. How much of that do you feel like is really the case?
I'll be honest. So many times what I started doing when I made this transition is I actually went to begin the process of giving lectures to my patients and then doing cooking classes. And I'll never forget one of the first cooking classes that I did, called the Cath Lab, by the way, Cooking Alternative to Health. And so what we ended up, I remember there was a patient who came in and she said to me, hey, I've gone keto. And everyone kind of gasped a little bit because they knew it was a plant-based cooking lecture. And instead of attacking her, I actually applauded her. I said, that's great. I said, why is that great? What you've done by going paleo keto is that it's taking you away from the standard American diet of eating ultra-processed foods, highly refined, high in sugar, high in processed carbohydrates. I said, but here's the catch. That's going to trigger you to lose some weight, but what's your real question you're asking? If your real question that you're asking is about the health benefits, then now we need to make that next leap. We need to move things forward. And so what we understand is we understand by the review of the literature, the most contiguous, large amount of literature that we have points to fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, legumes, nuts, and seeds are going to be the method in which we can achieve that health. And giving the body time to rest, which are what many colleagues talk about in terms of fasting of some variation and so forth as well. And so that was the conversation at that time. So I believe this is an entry that people are searching for something when they're seeking out these other dietary approaches. And so my job is to understand first, what's the problem? And then how important is that problem to them? And then we take strides to get them to the point which is towards eating more whole food plant-based.
Now I learned a little bit about, you know, the different types of lipoproteins, I guess. You know, you get your small particles, large particles. Some people say, you know, oh, it's the small particles. It doesn't matter. It has to be less than 7 nanometers. Do we need to get wrapped up in that? Or is there a little education you could share with us about different particle sizes and how to interpret our, you know, our cholesterol?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think the clear overriding scenario is that most people are concerned about the minutia when their cholesterol levels are ridiculously high. They're 250, they're 300. Their bad cholesterol is 130, 150, 170, 180. And they're saying, well, doc, what about the small, dense LDL? Well, that doesn't matter right now. We need to bring your total cholesterol down. Now, then we can have discussions about everything else. So the way I simply kind of think about it is the fact that, yes, there is some relationship that we know the ability of the small, dense LDL to permeate the endothelium and to lead to the inflammatory process that develops atherosclerosis is increased, right? And so we want to try and prevent that as much as possible. So we understand that the cholesterol, the fat, and so forth, it's going to be contained inside of saturated fat, primarily inside of animal products. But I think the key thing is that we try and move things down to such a reductionist model in terms of the cholesterol solely or the this, that, and the other, and it's holistic, and that's where science is telling us. That's where all the work from the gut microbiome is coming out, telling us about carnitine and the relationship with TMAO and so forth. And so we're seeing that it's very complex in terms of this thing called health, this fragility of life called health. And so we have to look at the totality, and the totality is that these foods help to sustain your life. And so, yeah, I can break down to apple B, apple protein B, and to LDL-C and the C-reactive protein, and kind of go down there to tumor necrosis factor and all these variables that are there. Study after study has replicated the fact that I can drop my inflammatory index when I transition to a whole food plant-based diet. There's a wonderful study that was done out of Houston with Baxter Montgomery, kind of looking at the intervention of whole food plant-based on this inflammatory profile and showed a remarkable decrease in that. Work that was been done years and years ago by Dean Ornish and others, kind of really showing the fact that by adopting a whole food plant-based diet in conjunction with all other aspects of a health promoting living, that you can improve your endothelial function, that magical lining of the vessels, but not just that, these same inflammatory profiles.
It's better as you get older to have that cholesterol increase a little bit.
Yeah, so I haven't seen evidence, long-term evidence to really support that. I think that one, sure, we understand that your body needs cholesterol. You produce cholesterol. But what we're saying is the added cholesterol, right? And so folks will a lot of times argue about oils or argue about animal products, but most people I know and I interact with, they're using the oil to deep fry things, to fry the potatoes, to fry the this, the that, the other, and they're not using it as a light dressing or anything else that may be attributed inside literature. They're using it for deep frying, which means they're changing the chemical moiety of the structure of the oils. On top of now, they're creating all of these adverse chemicals that are there that lead to detriment to their body, cancer and high blood pressure and heart disease as well.
Now, there's a lot of controversy regarding oils.
Yes.
And here at the NHA conference, there are predominantly no SOS. How do you feel about like no salt, oil, or sugar? Like a little salt's okay, right? I mean, if you're in control of the overall intake, right?
So, you know, here's the thing, is that what I tell people is that our body, we don't need a whole lot of salt. From a nutritional value, we don't need it. However, if salt is the last thing on your table and you have no health problems whatsoever, then perhaps being very measured. I mean, we understand that 1 teaspoon is 2,000 milligrams of sodium. So I tailor the message of overall health depending upon where a person is at. I use the analogy a lot of times is that, you know, if you're 25 and you're putting money aside for your retirement, okay, if you're not quite as focused for like the first 5-10 years, it's probably not a horrible thing. But if you're 55 and 60 and you're just going to start investing in your retirement and you don't have a limited time, you have to go all in. So as certain individuals, it's all in. Now, the patients that I see are along that spectrum where they need to go all in. Now, they may not be willing to do that, so I have to work with them to bring them there gently. So the difference is, one is I'll say, yes, I agree for eliminating salt, minimal salt, no oil, minimal oil, and trying to stay away from refined sugar.
The animal saturated fat compared to like avocado and stuff, those are like long chain versus medium chain fatty acids. Some people say saturated fat isn't causing a problem.
Saturated fat goes hand in hand with animal protein. We understand that animal protein is detrimental. We understand that animal protein, so when we look at observational studies have shown that you have a poor longevity. Your mortality, your death rate is a lot higher when you consume animal products compared to not. We know that there is an increased risk of cardiovascular events. There's an increased risk of cancers and so forth with animal protein. So what's with animal protein? Saturated fat, right? The issue is tied together with animal protein. I have not seen studies that have directly pointed to coconut, whole food coconut, right? I'm not saying coconut oil, coconuts, avocados as being horrifically detrimental. You know, when I look at the whole food, when you look at the whole food, you're not able to eat exceptionally large amounts of whole foods because of the fiber that's there. And some of these are, yes, they're less fiber than other types of foods, but there's still fiber inside of it, so it can be a bit of a challenge. Here's the catch with things like avocado. Are you making it into guacamole, which is not bad, with tomatoes for lycopene, onions for the antiplatelet effect, with the cilantro and the spices? Those are wonderful for you. But are you eating it with chips that are deep fried and you're having excessive amounts of those? Are you adding it to lathering it on some cheese quesadilla or a vegan cheese quesadilla? That's not ideal. But is a guacamole in a tablespoon harmful based on studies? I'm not aware of studies that have pointed to that alone.
As far as like research though, are there some studies that are at least worth mentioning?
I still fall back on the original studies that were done by Dean Ornish as some of the base foundations. I look at that study. I look at the study from the Mount Abu open heart trial that once again looked cardiovascularly in terms of studies that are there and showing that yes, indeed, that there can be an impact from a holistic approach towards lifestyle, that it can impact cardiovascular disease. So it's the #1 killer globally in the United States, and so that's huge in terms of the power and the impact. Obviously, we know the evidence health study too. For the most part, what we're going to get the most from is we're going to get the most from longitudinal studies that will tell us, as opposed to even randomized, double-blinded, placebo-controlled trials, because it's hard to blind like that and do an effective nutritional study. So you're going to have to look at population-based studies. And the best population-based studies are going to be those from like the Epic Oxford, which has produced a number of different studies showing the benefit of eating plant-based compared to meat-eating predominantly diets in terms of cancer, in terms of heart disease. We know the Adventist Health Study very similarly has shown that. And what's wonderful is they also do a breakdown of gender. They do it based on ethnicity too as well, still demonstrating the power and the impact of it. So I find that those studies are the staples, the foundation. And every once in a while, we'll get a great study that'll be about legumes, or a great study that's impactful for high blood pressure. And all these things are just adding. They're adding to the knowledge base that's there. But those are foundational studies that will yield information continually now, because it's longitudinal, it's observation. They continue to add enrollees or participants inside those studies.
Has there ever been a study that you've come across that's kind of like thrown you off and shown eating meat does the exact opposite of what you're saying?
Periodically, there are going to be some studies that are going to come out about dairy or about this, and you're like, well, wait a minute, that's kind of contradictory of what everything else tells us. And so, come on, that's life, right? I mean, how many times in life have you encountered a situation you've encountered 1,000 times, and you like think you know the outcome, and something different happens? And so, looking on average at the totality is what I try and look at of it. And here's the thing I tell patients: if I see a solid study that is replicable and continues to produce evidence that says eating standard American diet junk food is good for you, I'll quit talking about not eating it. I'll join you at the table. Now, I won't do that necessarily for animal products, just because it's more convoluted than that. We talk about the environment, we talk about the climate, we talk about multiple factors that come into play with that, even beyond the human health. But for me, personally as a physician, human health is a priority. And that's my first goal, is to make sure that you're healthy and put me out of business. That's really the goal.
Now, fatty acids from fish, that's another hot topic. I guess there hasn't been a lot of evidence, or the evidence has kind of come around and said, and maybe not as much for the heart, maybe more for the brain. Now, what are your thoughts on DHA supplementation or fatty acid supplements?
Yeah, when we look at that overall, I think there is probably some need for us to make sure we get omegas. And we understand that there is a paucity in terms of that with standard American diet. And so whether or not it's from chia seeds and flax seeds, so are you getting those? That's the real question, right? So I can talk about getting it from whole food sources, but are you actually eating that on a regular basis? And if you're not, then supplementation may be the answer. However, you have to be careful, right? Because if we look at, is it a fish source from a marine source, which means you may have concentrated levels of mercury and other things, and it's not FDA approved, monitored, and so you're having concentrations that are variable. And you brought up a good point, which is even inside the cardiology, the general cardiology literature, we've had to step back from some of the thoughts that supplementation with omegas is really going to be beneficial for life-saving benefits. And we've kind of stepped back away from that because the evidence is really bearing out. The key thing is that, and T. Colin Campbell broke this out very well in his book Whole years ago about the reductionist model. He wasn't the first to illuminate that, but it was most powerful inside our community. And we try our best to figure out, what's the secret sauce? Okay, let me just pop that pill. The answer isn't in the pill. The answer is in the substance of what we do. And the answer is in terms of where are the fish eating the plankton if they're not farmed, of course. You know, eating those vegetables and the variables that are there, but we have to diversify what we eat. We can't say, well, I'm getting more than enough and all we're having is iceberg lettuce and a few cherry tomatoes. We have to diversify and make sure our plates, more times than not, look like the rainbow.
One thing about evidence, what is the best way to kind of assess all this? Because, you know, there's so much misinformation out there, information coming from every angle. How does somebody make sense of it all? You got any tips on that? You know, with keto, carny, and all that?
Yeah, you know, I mean, I think the honest truth is the simplest way that I approach it is that when you say it out loud, it should make sense. So we talk about who on earth really says that vegetables are harmful for you? Not very many people, right? So if we can sit and we can sell on what our common beliefs are. Now, if our common beliefs are vegetables are good for us, right? In general, most people may say like, oh, okay, yeah, white rice is gonna have arsenic in it or this, that, and the other, and be careful, but they aren't talking about bulgur. They're not talking about amaranth. They're not talking about some of the other variables. Yeah, so are they talking about berries? No, they're not talking about berries. Are they talking about mushrooms? No, they're not talking about mushrooms. So we can agree on there. So the things that we agree on, you know, are central. So let's start there in terms of building your plate first with that, right? That's the most key and important thing. It's hard for everyone to really appraise the research because it's hard for physicians. And we just saw this during COVID. Everyone became a research expert. Everyone became a medical pundit that they were able to kind of give their input and thought. And I'll tell you, even physicians, even scientists, we have to constantly go back and review some of the literature.
Can you tell by looking at somebody if they're healthy or not? Can people tell in general if somebody's healthy, like because maybe they're overweight? Does that mean they're
General
healthy?
answer is no, you can't. It's their metabolic process. So there's an idea out there called TOFI. You may have heard of that, which is found on the outside, found on the inside. The key metabolic aspect that's harmful is what's called visceral fat. That visceral fat can line your organs, and it's been shown that a certain percentage of very thin, slender individuals will still have a high preponderance of visceral fat, making them more inclined. So where do I see this? Well, when I'm in the cath lab, which I'm still practicing cardiologist, and I'm taking a look at the arteries of the heart, I will see morbidly obese individuals who have pristine coronary arteries. I will see individuals who look fit as you do, and their heart arteries are horrible. And so it's not always predictive. You can't always tell. That's the one thing that I tell everyone. I say, you know, everyone else looks on the outside. I'm gonna look at your heart, and I'm gonna wait for my judgment until I get in there and I take pictures of your heart.
I get a variety of phenotypes on my channel, somatotypes or whatever.
Yeah.
And sometimes people say, oh man, why does that person look like that? They shouldn't look like that if they're plant-based.
This is part of the whole stress cascade, right? That we want everyone to fit inside one particular paradigm, that everyone's going to look the same way, you're going to have the same build, but we're all different. So genotypically, yeah, we're all different. Now, does that mean someone should be morbidly obese? Probably not. We probably have to kind of do a honesty check, a gut check, and really say, well, what am I really eating or drinking or whatever it may be? You know, and then perhaps it requires them being a little bit more intentional, a little bit more aggressive. But do I expect everyone to be the same level of slimness and weight? No, I don't. I don't. There's going to be different muscle masses, there's going to be different genetic tendencies and so forth. What I'm most concerned with is a person's overall panel. So if their panel looks great, their cholesterol's pristine, their blood pressure's pristine, their A1C is pristine, their markers for cancer are low. Well, now I'm talking about weight reduction for arthritis, right? To reduce arthritis and that wear and tear. I'm looking at weight loss perhaps for sleep apnea because of the risk of poor sleep that plays a role. And so there's still a role for trying to reduce the weight, but everyone's going to look different, and we shouldn't be judgmental about that.
To do any kind of special research to figure out, hey, it's okay to raise my children vegan?
No, not at all, not at all, right? So, I mean, if we go back in the eons of time, you know, first of all, meat wasn't plentiful. So what did people have to eat? They foraged, and they ate the berries and the things that they grew and so forth, and the kids grew up fine. And so, you know, diversity is extremely important in terms of the foods that the kids eat. I lived off of 3 rules, right? Smoothies, soups, and salads. They didn't always like the soup, so we do chili, that kind of a thing with like chopped mushrooms in it and beans and make it up where it wasn't too spicy. Smoothies allowed them to have the colors of the rainbow and blend, and it was great there. And then salads, my kids still to this day, they love salads.
Profoundly more protective to raise your children plant-based.
I do, absolutely I do. So we understand that disease is not something that just magically appears when we're 30, 40, 50, and 60. That disease, the progression to disease begins from childhood. We understand that. We understand the perils of diabetes. We understand the perils of atherosclerotic heart disease that is really pervasive from head to toe. And so if we can set our kids on the foundation, all of us as parents want one thing, for our kids to live a better life than what we lived. I tell my son all the time and my daughter, I said, Dad just wants you to be better than me. I mean, I want you to be smarter, faster, stronger, more successful, all those things. And so that's our goal. But part of the most important thing is our health is our wealth. And so if we can set them off on that foundation of eating healthfully, of moving, of dealing with stress, of comprehending and knowing how to ask the right questions, that's powerful. That's extremely powerful.
How does stress affect vascular health?
When we're stressed, a whole process really begins, right? And so obviously our pupils dilate, our vessels begin to constrict, our heart rate begins to beat faster, we go through what's called gluconeogenesis. We distribute glucose or blood sugar inside of our vessels so we can be prepared to fight or to run, right? And so that's what happens. And so acute stressful events are important. That's what we need. We need that to survive.
Sound like one just happened.
Yes, exactly, right? But what happens though in the long term is that when you have repeated incidents of stress, that when you have that boss that's just constantly on you, setting deadlines, when you have bills that are due and lack of resources, when you have all these things on a repeated basis, a daily basis, now you develop distress or chronic stress. And that chronic stress now leads itself towards cancer, diabetes, heart disease, and even worse, what we call broken heart syndrome, stress-induced cardiomyopathy. And so these are some of the powerful impacts of unabated stress. And that's why oftentimes inside lectures, I'll speak to our health equals our resiliency divided by our stress. We have to build our resiliency to offset the stressors in life that are bound to happen. We can't avoid the stressors in life, but we don't need to add one thing, which is nutritional stress. See, nutritional stress tips the scale, and that's when we eat poorly on top of all the stressors, our health declines immediately. I will give you one slight correction. We can't forget about Nathan Pritikin and the work that he did. So I always like to kind of highlight, and I think that's an area that we have to really build and demonstrate the history for folks too as well, that this conference, that a conference like NHA has done a good job. They're built on a foundation, but Nathan Pritikin in 1955 was diagnosed with heart disease and through his own reading and research recognized the trends that would happen during World War II that many lecturers will speak to a lot of times, and saw that all of a sudden the absence and vanishing of coronary artery disease, as well as the work of Nathan Burkitt too as well, and decided that he was going to adopt this. He wasn't a physician. He had just had an interest and started going to all of the medical community lectures and so forth. And so what's phenomenal is that he actually completely changed his diet and essentially reversed it at this point, and that's what was the building blocks for the Pritikin Longevity Institute. And so then you have others, and he did a lot of research out the VA and showing reversal and improvement from peripheral vascular disease that then was built upon. And so that's the wonderful part, is that we all are building upon on the shoulders of those who've come before us. And not to negate the work of Dr. Ornish, because he's a giant as far as the field and the work that he did when it was unpopular. I mean, I always joke and say, well, when I started this, it was unpopular and nobody was really doing it. They didn't have all the resources there as I started lecturing and so forth. It doesn't compare to the likes of Ornish and Esselstyn and Campbell, where they were ostracized from medical communities and so forth.
How far back do we know that eating animal causes heart disease? A lot of people say free range is really the way to go, but everything was free range 100 years ago. Did we notice this then?
Yeah, I think obviously we know the landmark observation in terms of the fat versus sugar debate really kind of came to light with Ansel Keys and so forth. But prior to that time, there was a lot of work that was done out of Europe. There was a Dutch-Indonesian study. There was work that was done out of Russia and looking at rabbits and others and showing the cholesterol hypothesis really kind of developed in terms of the impact of animal protein or saturated fat on the cholesterol and predictive of events. So this has been a long time coming. really as it relates to that. I'm not aware of a predominance of work prior to that in the 19th century, in 1800s and 1700s as it relates to it, beyond some of the ones I mentioned there, but this is not new. This is not new at all. There's been a lot of work that's been done over the years.
Like they find some of our ancient ancestors' remains, they see some artery damage there, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So there's in mummifications and mummies, we see definitely that there's evidence of atherosclerotic heart disease. And this is obviously thousands of years ago. So that's something that's been well described, and this is through modern imaging technology has shown these evidence of this. But I think our understanding of prior history, it's a bit murky, right? So just like the evidence coming out probably the past 10, 15 years really about gladiators, and about their diet being predominantly that of plant-rich source foods and so forth. And so, our perception of what reality versus fact is limited because many of those things from prehistoric and ancient times, the first thing that's going to go away are going to be your grains and that's gone, it's dissipated, right? It's taken up with the CO2 in the earth. You might have some bones, and that's what you're looking at. Oh, this is probably how they lived and so forth, and trying to look at the teeth and the way in which what they were eating. And that's where we understand a great deal of the information about prior eating patterns.
Are there any tribes that are plant-based? Historically, what are the most plant-based tribes?
Well, I think the one that comes to mind, and I'm blanking on the name, I don't want to mispronounce it, but there's a group of Hispanic individuals inside of the Southwest who have a large burden of diabetes and heart disease and obesity and so forth, and their genetic relatives, same identical, are some of the greatest runners on the earth. And they're thin and they eat a plant predominant diet. That's predominantly their diet, and they do almost ultra marathons. And so we do understand that this relationship in terms of individuals who've eaten a healthful manner throughout their life or adopt based upon that's natural from the ground as opposed to being subsidized and given, right? So a lot of probably what happened inside these areas in the United States is food, whether it's government cheese, whether it's the processed white flour, the Spam, that leads to increased disease burden that's there compared to their cousins who basically have none of that. And the work Dr. McDougall did and really kind of outlined that even in the Hawaiians and saying, okay, let's have you eat a Hawaiian plant-based diet, right? That starch, yeah, that all of a sudden there was dissipation of disease and of obesity and so forth.
Why are there so many cardiologists that aren't like you? I mean, I know Doc Baxter, Montgomery, Joel Kahn, Esselstyn. I mean, there's a lot of them.
Yeah, it's increasing. I think one of the things is the fact that there's a saying that I say a lot of times, which is resources go where value is placed. Resources go where value is placed. And so when you look at medical school education, it's geared towards medical students graduating from, or taking the USMLE, right, for licensing tests. And so that means that that's where value is placed. So resources go towards passing that test, and that test does nothing about lifestyle. So it goes to pharmacology and procedures. Then they exit that and they go into residency, training to become doctors so they can get their board certification that everyone loves to see on the doors of doctors, right? Well, these board certification tests, once again, test on pills and procedures. So resources go to teaching pills and procedures. Then doctors get out into practice, and reimbursement happens through what? Diagnoses, pills, which are part of the quality metric of making sure patients are on a certain number of pills for the disease entity, and then also procedures. So in reimbursement historically has not been prevalent with lifestyle. So the reason why doctors are not going down that road is predominantly because resources haven't been distributed there to put a value on it. So the whole system is broken. And so you have a few individuals who've broken that tide. They've gone ahead and they've gone rogue. They've gotten out the matrix and they decide that this is the way I'm going to practice.